Beginning in 1285, a shrewd king named Philip IV, also known as Philip the Fair, ascended the throne in France. He wouldn't just shape the country of France, he would have a profound effect on the papacy as well. You see, King Philip IV needed a lot of money to fund his war with England, and so he began taxing the churches and the clergy, and that started a feud with the popes. Pope Boniface VIII, who was also a shrewd pope, decided to excommunicate King Philip IV and wrote a famous papal bull entitled Unum Sanctum, which argued that all governments were subservient to the church, and particularly the papacy. King Philip IV was not going to have any of it, and so he had Pope Boniface VIII kidnapped and severely beaten. The kidnappers let the Pope go after a few days, but the whole ordeal was so traumatizing that Pope Boniface VIII died a short time afterwards. At the following conclave, the cardinals felt that one of the highest priorities was to normalize relations between Rome and France. This escalation was getting too out of hand. So they elected Pope Benedict XI, who rescinded Pope Boniface's Unum Sanctum, along with King Philip's excommunication. However, Pope Benedict XI died less than a year after being elected pope. The cardinals then decided to elect someone outside of their ranks, a French native and the Archbishop of Bordeaux, who took on the name of Pope Clement V. At the time, Rome was a real mess. It was a dirty city with lots of civil unrest, mainly fighting between prominent families. So Clement decided to do something rather unconventional. He opted not to go to Rome. Instead, he took the papacy to a prominent city on the Rhone River called Avignon. Technically, it was located in the Holy Roman Empire, though now it is part of France. And this would become the home of 7 successive popes. This is known as the Avignon Papacy. But it's also often called the Babylonian captivity, a reference to Israel's exile. The Avignon Papacy would last for almost 75 years, and it ended with 3 individuals all claiming to be the rightful pope. Hi, this is Justin Hibbard, and you're listening to Why Catholic, my podcast about the what and why of Catholicism. Thank you so much for joining me for this next episode in our series on the 21 Ecumenical Councils. For most of this series, each episode pertains to a particular council. However, from time to time, we have a little interlude and talk about some major historical events that occurred between councils. And the Avignon Papacy and the Great Western Schism, which occurred between the Council of Vienne and the Council of Constance, really deserves its own episode. A while back, beginning in episode 108, I did a series on the papacy, and one of the questions I got a couple of times was, are you going to do an episode on the Avignon Papacy? I didn't at the time, but that will be the subject for today. Before we dive in, let me just say thank you for being a listener to Why Catholic. This podcast is 100% supported by listeners like you, and I would love for you, yes, you, to consider becoming a supporter as well. It's only $5 a month. Think of it like buying me a cup of coffee. You can sign up to be a patron at whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. That's whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. Thank you for your generosity. All right, let's get on with the Avignon Papacy. We actually focused on the beginning of the Avignon Papacy in the last episode, episode 166 on the Council of Vienne. If you recall, Pope Clement V, the first pope to call Avignon home, was pressured by King Philip IV to dissolve the Knights Templar. A lot of it came down to King Philip's desire to seize the wealth of the Knights Templar. And so, buckling under the pressure of King Philip IV, Pope Clement V convened the Council of Vienne. Vienne is a city in France, not to be confused with Vienna, Austria, and he personally issued a number of papal bulls accusing the Knights Templar of all sorts of evil acts and ordered the dissolution of the Knights Templar. I ended the last episode telling the story of the Grand Knight of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay, who was burned at the stake in Paris on March 18, 1314. He reportedly asked to face the Cathedral of Notre Dame and amidst the flames declared that Pope Clement and King Philip would meet him before God. And mysteriously, Pope Clement V died only a month later, and King Philip IV died in a hunting accident within the same year. But one of the things I didn't talk about was the importance of the city of Avignon. Why Avignon? Why would popes want to make this the center of Western Christianity? First, Avignon was a city on the Rhone River, which made it a major city for trade and commerce. It actually sits between the Rhone and the Durance rivers. It's now located in southern France, but at the time of the Avignon Papacy, it was part of the Holy Roman Empire. And being in the southern part of what is now France, it was accessible to Italy, France, as well as Spain. So while it didn't have the legitimacy of Rome as the church founded by Saints Peter and Paul, it was a city of modern importance in the same way that Constantinople became a prominent city, and then eventually became a major hub for Christianity. Following Pope Clement V's death in 1314, the cardinals were split on who to elect as the next pope, which resulted in a papal vacancy known as sede vacante. After 2 years without a pope, the cardinals eventually elected a French cardinal bishop named Jacques Duézé, who took on the name Pope John XXII, who, like his predecessor, kept the papacy in the city of Avignon. And let me just pause and say, I am terrible with the French language, and so if I butcher some of these names, please forgive me. Unlike his predecessor, who capitulated easily to the French king, Pope John XXII strengthened the papacy. A canon lawyer, he was well known for his administrative prowess. A couple of things to note about his pontificate. He got into a scuttle of sorts with the Franciscans. They were arguing that the vow of poverty meant that they could own absolutely nothing. Their buildings, their clothes, even the scraps of food they said belonged to the church. And maybe Pope John XXII just didn't want the responsibility of micromanaging their order, but he told them that no, it was okay for the Franciscans to own some possessions. They could still take the vow of poverty and have some belongings. Therefore, the papacy wasn't responsible for taking care of their land and buildings and so forth. Pope John XXII is known for canonizing Thomas Aquinas, and he's also famous for his controversial views on the beatific vision. He believed that those who died wouldn't see God until after the final judgment. And this caused quite the theological controversy, and he eventually recanted his beliefs the day before his death in 1334. When the cardinals met to elect Pope John XXII's successor, it appeared that it would be a rather quick election. The favorite was Cardinal Jean Ramon de Comminges. The cardinals just wanted one thing from Comminges. They wanted him to swear that he would not return the papacy back to Rome. Comminges said, "Nope, I'm not making any promises." And the cardinals, kind of as a dare, said, "Well, if you're not going to make that promise, maybe we'll throw Jacques Fournier's name into the mix." Jacques Fournier was a French cardinal bishop who didn't have much experience in politics. And wouldn't you know, the College of Cardinals ended up electing Fournier, to which Fournier told them, "You have elected an ignoramus." Basically, he called himself an idiot. Well, that self-labeled ignoramus took on the name of Pope Benedict XII. He was a genuine reformer who tried to restore monastic discipline and bring simplicity to the papacy. It seemed as though he was going to move the papacy to Bologna in northern France. While surveyors were working those plans, he ordered repairs of St. Peter's Basilica, St. Paul's Basilica, and the Papal Palace in Rome. But perhaps all of that was just a decoy for keeping the papacy in Avignon, because he began construction of the Papal Palace in Avignon. Pope Benedict XII died in 1342, serving as pope for a total of 8 years. His successor was Cardinal Pierre Roger, who took on the name of Pope Clement VI, and he would reign from 1342 until 1352. It was under his pontificate that the Papal Palace of Avignon was completed. In the show notes, I have links to some videos on the city of Avignon and the Avignon Papacy, and one of the important things to note is how extravagant the Papal Palace is. The Palais des Papes, or Palace of the Popes, is the largest Gothic structure in the world, about the size of 4 cathedrals, and that lavish palace defined the extravagant spending of Pope Clement VI's pontificate. Now, there were 2 other major events happening during Pope Clement VI's reign. First, there was the start of the 100 Years' War, an ongoing conflict between France and England that actually began in 1337 and lasted 100 years. And then there was the Black Death, a pandemic which occurred from 1347 through 1350 and claimed the lives of as many as 1/3 to 2/3 of all those living in Europe. One of the popular claims during that time was that the Jews had caused the Black Death, and that led to rampant anti-Semitism and Jewish persecution. Pope Clement VI issued 2 papal bulls rebutting these claims and condemning anti-Semitism. Because so many died without access to priests, Pope Clement VI also granted a remission of sins to all who died of the plague. The Pope survived the plague. Many of his cardinals did not, but he did die in 1352. He was succeeded by Cardinal Etienne Aubert, who took on the name of Pope Innocent VI. Like his predecessor, he ruled for 10 years, from 1352 to 1362, but unlike his predecessor, Pope Innocent VI reformed the Curia and curbed spending. He had to. Pope Clement VI essentially bankrupted the church with his extravagance. Pope Innocent VI is most famous for his role in trying to restore peace in Rome. The Treaty of Brittany of 1360 brought a temporary peace between France and England during the 100 Years' War, and his decision not to send help to the Greek Orthodox Church in exchange for them coming back into unity with the Catholic Church is another thing he is known for. Part of the reason for that decision not to help the Greek Church was that he just didn't have the resources to send them help. The sixth Avignon Pope was Guillaume de Grimont, who took on the name of Pope Urban V. Of all the Avignon popes, Grimont was the most accomplished and holy. He's the only Avignon pope to be canonized a saint. He earned a doctorate in canon law, he was a professor, and eventually named the abbot of Saint Germain Monastery. And during the reign of his predecessor, Pope Clement VI, sent him on a few missions to Italy to help bring order and peace. Grimont wasn't even a bishop when he was elected pope. The College of Cardinals were afraid that Rome would revolt on the news of yet another French pope, so they kept it secret until they were able to summon Grimont to Avignon. And that's when they were like, "Surprise! You're the next pope." He reportedly took on the name of Urban V because all the popes named Urban had been canonized as saints. Even as Pope, Urban V continued to live a very Benedictine monastic life. He issued a number of clerical reforms and prioritized education and founded a number of major universities. He also threatened excommunication to anyone who harassed Jewish people or forced them to be baptized. Pope Urban V really wanted to unify the Eastern and Western churches, and as part of that, he advocated for a crusade against the Turks. The Turks were a problem to the Eastern Christians. Pope Urban V earnestly sought to return the papacy back to the city of Rome. In fact, in 1367, he stepped foot in Rome, the first pope to do so in 60 years. However, due to political unrest, the pope's time in Rome was short-lived. Now, at the same time, a mystic nun by the name of Bridget, we know her now as Saint Bridget of Sweden, made a pilgrimage to Rome, partly to advocate for a new religious order called the Bridgetines. In 1370, she met with Pope Urban V as he was preparing to go back to Avignon, and she told him that he would die if he left Rome. And that's what happened. Pope Urban V died in December of 1370, just a few months after arriving back in Avignon. This brings us to the seventh and last Avignon Pope, Pierre Roger de Beaufort, who was actually there when St. Bridget predicted Pope Urban V's death. Beaufort was unanimously elected just a couple of weeks after his predecessor's death, and he took on the name of Pope Gregory XI. Pope Gregory prioritized peace. He advocated for peace between England and France, though that failed, and he really tried to bring peace to Italy and the Papal States. At the same time, there was another mystic in Italy by the name of Catherine of Siena, who was a prolific writer and by the end of Pope Gregory's life had written him 14 letters advocating for peace, church reform, and moving the papacy back to Rome. On September 13, 1376, despite protests from the French government and his cardinals, Pope Gregory XI left Avignon, and after a series of stops, he entered Rome on January 17, 1377. Thus, the Avignon Papacy, which began in 1305 with the election of Pope Clement V, ended 72 years later as Pope Gregory XI bravely returned to Rome. Well, it sort of ended. You see, Pope Gregory XI died about a year after moving to Rome. As the cardinals were in conclave, a mob formed in Rome pressuring them to elect an Italian who would keep the papacy in Rome rather than return it to Avignon. And so the cardinals, under great pressure, elected Bartolomeo Prignano, an Italian who would take on the name Pope Urban VI, the first non-French pope in 73 years. Right from the beginning, Pope Urban VI made some enemies in the Curia. He had the audacity to preach that members of the Curia had no business taking gifts and gratuities from rulers and aristocrats. Essentially, he was advocating for a reform that the church needed to be free from secular influences. He also said that he would not be returning the papacy to Avignon. Well, that didn't sit well with those clergy who were used to living rather luxuriously thanks to the bribes and favors of rich benefactors and government officials. A group of French cardinals invited Pope Urban VI to a meeting in Anagni, a city southeast of Rome. Pope Urban VI realized it was likely a trap meant to kill him, and so he refused to go. On August 9, 1377, after the Pope failed to appear, the French cardinals declared that Pope Urban VI's papacy was invalid since they had been pressured by that Roman mob. Less than 2 weeks later, on August 20th, they officially declared sede vacante, meaning the chair of St. Peter, aka the papacy, was officially empty. Then on September 20th, 1378, in the city of Fondi, the French cardinals elected Robert of Geneva, a Frenchman, to become the pope. He would take on the name Pope Clement VII, and he, as you might suspect, moved to Avignon to try and once again establish the Avignon Papacy. So now we have rival popes, Pope Urban VI in Rome, who had the support of the Romans, and Antipope Clement VII in Avignon, who had the support of the French. And throughout Europe, allegiance was divided and political unrest ensued. Pope Urban VI died in 1389, and his successor was Pietro Tomacelli Cibo, an Italian, who became Pope Boniface IX. In Avignon, Antipope Clement VII died in 1394, and he was succeeded by Antipope Benedict XIII. And if you're having trouble remembering these names, don't worry, it is indeed confusing. What you need to know is that in the early 1400s, there was Pope Boniface IX in Rome and Antipope Benedict XIII in Avignon. In 1404, Pope Boniface IX died, and the Roman cardinals agreed to hold off on electing a new pope if Antipope Benedict XIII would resign. It was basically the Roman cardinals telling the French cardinals, hey, let's elect a new pope together, but in order to do that, we need to get rid of this Avignon papacy. When Benedict refused to abdicate his throne in Avignon, the Roman cardinals elected Cosimo de' Migliorati, another Italian who became Pope Innocent VII, but he only ruled for 2 years before dying in 1406. The cardinals in Rome then elected Angelo Correr, who became Pope Gregory XII. So now we have Pope Gregory XII in Rome, and we still have Antipope Benedict XIII in Avignon. Well, in 1406, both popes agreed that they would resign so that order could be restored. Keep in mind that this Western Schism in the Catholic Church was terrible for everyone. Countries were divided over which church they supported, and since some areas supported the Roman pontiff and some supported the Avignon antipope, it meant that each was receiving less financial support from the local parishes. So both popes agreeing to resign and letting the cardinals get together and elect a successor was really the best solution. They were at an impasse, and continuing down this road of two rival popes would only continue destroying the church. However, at the last minute, both popes were like, just kidding, I'm not resigning. And this led to the Council of Pisa, which wasn't an ecumenical council because it didn't have the pope's support. At the Council of Pisa, the cardinals decided to depose both popes and elect a new one, the Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, Peter Filargi, who became Pope Alexander V. And because neither Benedict or Gregory would resign, there were now 3 popes. The new pope, Alexander V, only lived for a year, and then Baldassare Cosa was elected, and he became Pope John XXIII. All right, so just to keep this all straight, we now have the Avignon Pope, Benedict XIII, we have the Roman Pontiff, Gregory XII, and now we have a Pisan Pope, John XXIII, and we call it the Pisan Papacy because he and his predecessor were elected by cardinals gathered in the city of Pisa. John XXIII wanted to settle this matter once and for all. 2 popes were bad and causing major harm for the church. 3 were just outrageous and could quickly lead to the church's demise. So in 1414, John XXIII, with the support of Gregory XII, convened the Council of Constance. This would become the Catholic Church's 16th ecumenical council, and it will be our focus on the next episode of Why Catholic. Thank you for joining me for Why Catholic. Be sure to subscribe to Why Catholic wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to my Substack site and get the next episode in your email inbox. As a subscriber, you get a special discount code to the Why Catholic Etsy store. If you've been blessed by this podcast and you're feeling generous, there's also a way to financially support it, and patrons get some extra perks. To become a free subscriber or a patron, just go to whycatholic.substack.com/subscribe. Also join me on Instagram at whycatholicpodcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this is Why Catholic. God bless you.